The thunder rolled for hours the night Zanele gave birth. Rain lashed against the thatched roofs of Quathula village like ancestors mourning something only they could see. Inside her small mud hut, lit by flickering candlelight, Zanele screamed into a rolled cloth. No midwife, no mother. Only the neighbor's son, scared and trembling, stood by the door, ready to fetch the nurse when the time came. Her partner, Lutho, was gone. He had disappeared weeks before, spooked by rumors and old wives' tales that the baby wasn't normal. When the baby finally came, he didn't cry immediately, just a soft breath, a pause, then a weak, drawn-out sound like the wind trying to speak. Zanele held him close, studying his tiny features, eyes half closed, fingers curled oddly inward. She didn't know then that this moment would redefine every part of her identity. By morning, the nurse came and examined the boy. She said nothing at first, just pursed her lips. Later, she whispered to Zanele, "Your child. He may not be like the others." In the village, whispers traveled faster than the wind. By sundown, children pointed, women murmured, and old men shook their heads. "The cursed baby," someone muttered near the well, "born with a spirit too heavy for his bones." Zanele named him Sifo, gift. Lutho returned once, a week later, stood at the doorway and refused to come in. "This is not what I prayed for," he said, his voice cold. "You brought shame." He left before she could answer. But Zanele didn't cry. That night, with Sifo resting on her chest and thunder still rumbling in the distance, she whispered a promise. "They will see. One day they will all see who you are." Mornings in Quathula were once Zanele's favorite time. Dewdrops on pumpkin leaves, cattle bells echoing over hills, and the smell of maize porridge rising from every homestead. But now each morning felt like stepping onto a stage where she was the villain in a story she never agreed to act in. The village women, who once shared recipes and laughter with her at the river, now avoided her gaze. Children pointed at Sifo as she carried him strapped to her back, whispering words they barely understood. Curse, broken, bewitched. The cruelty wasn't always loud. Sometimes it came in silence, a fruit seller turning away as she approached, elders skipping her homestead during community visits, a healer who spat on the ground when she passed. Even the pastor hesitated to pray over Sifo at Sunday service, offering only vague blessings about strength through trials. Still, Zanele refused to shrink. Every morning she wiped Sifo down with warm cloths, massaged his stiff limbs, and sang to him softly in isiZulu, even when his eyes wouldn't follow her voice. Some said she was wasting her time. Others said she should send him to the city, to a home where those kinds of children were kept. But in those quiet moments, when Sifo lay still in her arms and gave her the faintest twitch of a smile, Zanele saw life. Not brokenness, not shame. Just a boy, her boy, born with a different rhythm. One afternoon, she visited the local clinic hoping for answers. The nurse avoided her eyes and handed her a referral slip for a hospital miles away. "He needs special care," she muttered. "But it's expensive." Zanele tucked the paper into her scarf, held Sifo closer, and walked home in silence. That night, as owls cried and the fire crackled low, Zanele stared into the flames. She had no money, no husband, no allies. But she had a mission now. If the village could not teach her how to help her son, she would teach herself. And the world would learn, whether it was ready or not. Zanele borrowed her first book from the primary school teacher, Miss Nomle, a young woman from the city who never quite fit in among the older villagers. Miss Nomle had once seen Zanele sweeping the school grounds to earn a few coins. "You're a strong one," she had said casually. "But strength without knowledge is like a spear without a tip." Zanele didn't know what those words truly meant until the day she asked Miss Nomle if she had anything about children like Sifo. The teacher blinked, surprised. Do you mean special needs? Zanele hesitated, nodding. The phrase sounded foreign, but something about it felt right. Miss Nomley went inside and returned with a worn English textbook titled Basic Care for Children with Disabilities. The pages were creased, some torn, but Zanele took it like a sacred scroll. That night, after Sifo had drifted into shallow sleep, Zanele lit a candle and began reading. She sounded out each word, whispering syllables under her breath like prayer. She did not understand everything, but what she did understand changed her. Cerebral palsy is a condition that affects movement, muscle tone, and posture. Her eyes widened. It had a name. A name. Her son was not a curse, not a punishment, not a broken soul. He had a condition, a medical one. And that meant, just maybe, he had a path forward. The next day, she borrowed another book, then another. She sold her last pair of gold earrings to buy a second-hand radio. Late at night, she tuned into talk shows from Johannesburg, Cape Town, Harare. Any voice discussing disability, parenting, resilience. She scribbled notes on maize meal bags. And slowly, she began to teach the village too, by how she held her head higher, by how she stretched Sifo's limbs more confidently in public, by how she corrected those who called him that one. Zanele was no longer just surviving. She was studying. She was awakening. She was preparing. And a quiet fire began to burn within her that no shame, no silence, no old superstition could quench. A month passed, and Zanele began to notice something she hadn't before. The village wasn't completely silent anymore. Among the scorn and side eyes, a few kind gestures crept in like shy footsteps. An elder woman, Mazwide, left a calabash of fermented milk at Zanele's door with no note. A teenage girl named Thando asked quietly if she could help carry firewood while Zanele held Sifo. And one afternoon, Miss Nomley invited her to speak to a small group of young mothers at the school about what she was learning. Zanele was terrified, but she went. She stood under a tree, Sifo wrapped snugly to her back, and spoke in a trembling voice about stretches, massages, and learning patience. She used her own broken English and icy Zulu freely, pausing only when her voice cracked. "They say our children are broken," she said, "but I say, maybe we are the ones who don't know how to see them properly." The young mothers nodded. One even wiped her eyes. That night, as if in response to her courage, Zanele had a dream. She was in the forest beyond the river, the one her grandmother used to call the spirit place. Drums echoed in the distance, slow and deep, like the heartbeat of the land. In the dream, she walked barefoot toward the sound, carrying Sifo in her arms. The trees whispered her name. A lion appeared on the path but did not roar. It bowed its head and stepped aside. Then an old woman, her face wrapped in beads, stood before her. "The path is not easy," the woman said, "but it is yours, and it is powerful." Zanele woke before dawn, her heart pounding. She didn't know what the dream meant yet, but she knew it wasn't just a dream. Something, or someone, was calling her forward. Word about Zanele's talk at the school spread faster than she expected. Some praised her boldness. Others said she was challenging the ancestors by naming things that should stay unnamed. In villages like Kwathula, change was like rain. It was welcome, but only when it came gently and on familiar terms. By the end of the week, the whispers returned, sharper this time. "She's teaching things from books, not from the elders. She talks too much for someone who doesn't have a husband. She thinks she's clever because of that crippled child." Zanele felt the sting of every word. But what truly shattered her calm came from someone she once called family. Her aunt, Mam Thembi, arrived from the next village, uninvited and full of fire. "You are shaming us, Zanele," she hissed. "Posting pictures of that boy on notice boards. Speaking in front of strangers. We are not white people. We don't parade our misfortunes." Zanele had to bite her lip to keep from shouting. Her heart thundered, Not from fear, but from fury. "Sifo is not a misfortune," she said, voice steady. "He is my son, and he deserves to be seen." Mamthembi left in silence, but her words lingered like smoke in the walls. Later that night, Miss Nomley handed Zanele a surprise, a poster from a town 2 hours away. Community Inclusion Seminar, Understanding Disability in African Families. There was a number to call and a name Zanele had heard whispered with reverence. Dr. Khumalo, a woman known for shaking rural mindsets with her bold, unapologetic work in disability advocacy. Zanele stared at the poster, then at Sifo, who was beginning to respond more to her voice each day. If they wouldn't give her a seat at their table, she'd build her own. And she'd start by calling that number. Zanele stood outside Miss Nomley's home, clutching the poster like a lifeline. Her hands trembled as she held the old Nokia phone Miss Nomley had lent her. She had rehearsed what to say, but her tongue felt stiff, thick with nerves. What if they laughed at her accent? What if they said she wasn't educated enough? What if she didn't belong? But Sifo's soft coo from her back gave her courage. She dialed the number slowly. 1 ring. 2. Then a voice, smooth, confident, and warm. Dr. Khumalo's line. "Good day." Zanele's throat dried. Hello," she managed in her best English. "My name is Zanele. I have a child with, cerebral, the condition. I saw the poster. I want to learn." There was a pause. Then the voice brightened. "Ah, wonderful. We welcome parents like you. You're exactly who this seminar is for." For the first time in a long time, Zanele didn't feel like she was asking for charity. She felt like she was joining something. They gave her the details. The seminar was in Gakubeni, a township 2 taxi rides away. No, there was no cost. Yes, she could bring Sifo. Yes, food would be provided. Zanele thanked them, her voice shaking with gratitude. That night she stayed up sewing a small carry pouch for Sifo, lined with old cloth and soft grass, so he wouldn't be jostled too hard in the taxis. She polished her shoes with cooking oil and ironed her second-best dress. The morning of the seminar, she walked to the taxi rank at dawn, carrying her child, her notes, and something new in her heart: hope. As the taxi sped toward the unknown, her reflection caught in the window. Older, sharper, stronger. Zanele wasn't just going to learn. The town of Kubeni pulsed with a rhythm Zanele had forgotten existed. Its air was heavy with possibility. Brightly painted walls, taxis blasting amapiano, and sidewalks humming with life. As she stepped off the minibus taxi, clutching Sifo close, her nerves flared again. Everyone here moved with purpose. She felt small, unsure, like a barefoot girl trying to fit into someone else's dream. The seminar was being held at a community hall beside a busy clinic. Colorful banners fluttered outside and volunteers in green shirts welcomed people at the door with warm smiles. "You're here for the seminar?" one asked. Zanele nodded, hesitantly. "Yes, I came from Kwathula." The woman's eyes widened, impressed. "All the way? You're strong, Mama. Come in. You're right on time." Inside, the hall was alive with stories. Parents sat in neat rows, some holding children with visible disabilities, others alone, scribbling notes. The walls were decorated with posters in multiple languages. "Disability is not inability. Ubuntu begins with inclusion. Strong children need strong communities." Then Dr. Khumalo stepped onto the stage. She wasn't what Zanele expected. Dressed simply in a patterned wrap skirt and head wrap, her voice was deep, commanding, but filled with fire. She spoke about cultural stigma, the danger of silence, and the power of mothers who refuse to give up. "We are not broken," Dr. Khumalo said, pointing gently into the crowd. "We are awakening. And when African mothers awaken, entire nations shift." Zanele blinked back tears. During the break, she found herself speaking with other mothers. Women who had once felt alone, who now ran small support groups in their villages, who had transformed heartbreak into purpose. By the end of the day, Dr. Kumalo herself approached her. "Zanele from Kwathula," she said. "I heard about you. Would you consider speaking next time?" Zanele's breath caught. "Speak?" "Her." She looked at Sifo, who was dozing peacefully against her chest. Then she smiled. "Yes, I think I will." Returning to Kwathula felt different this time. Zanele walked with her head higher, her steps firmer. She wasn't just Zanele the girl who had been left, or Zanele the mother of the cursed child. Now she carried something else, a mission, and the words of Dr. Kumalo still echoing in her mind. "We are not broken. We are awakening." The village, however, had not changed. 2 women fell silent when she passed. Children still whispered, but Zanele no longer flinched. She had seen something greater, heard stories that mirrored hers, seen tears turn to action, and met women who dared to fight shame with truth. Within a week, she approached Miss Nomle with a new idea. "I want to start a small gathering, just a circle, for parents, maybe even young girls, to talk." Miss Nomle blinked. "In Kwathula? They'll call it witchcraft, Zanele." "Let them," Zanele said. "They already call me worse." They borrowed a dusty storeroom behind the school. Zanele cleaned it with a broom she bought on credit. She put up her own hand-drawn posters. Sifo's Circle, a place for stories, strength, and support. She borrowed chairs. Asked Miss Nomle to help translate English documents. Offered tea and sweet potato slices. At first, no one came. But on the 3rd week, a young girl named Dudu walked in, carrying her younger brother who had never spoken a word in 5 years. "I saw you in town," Dudu whispered. "You talked about not hiding." Zanele smiled and took the boy gently from her arms. "Then you are welcome, both of you." Week by week, others came, quietly, cautiously. Some just sat and listened. Others cried. One mother confessed she hadn't held her disabled child in months, too ashamed to show him sunlight. And in that small, sunlit room, the first flame of change began to flicker. Zanele's story was no longer just her own. It was becoming a movement. One afternoon, just as Zanele was sweeping the floor of the small storeroom now known as Sifo's Circle, a white car pulled up near the school gate. Cars were rare in Kwathula unless someone had died, or an election was near. The villagers paused what they were doing, peeking from huts and market stalls with cautious curiosity. A tall man stepped out, dressed simply, but with something unusual slung over his shoulder, a camera. Zanele froze. He walked with quiet confidence, scanning the area until his eyes landed on her. "Zanele?" he asked gently. "Zanele Mkize?" She nodded, unsure. "Yes, who are you?" He smiled, extending his hand. "I'm Thabiso. I'm with Voice of the Village, a youth-led documentary project. Dr. Kumalo sent me. She said your story needs to be heard." Zanele glanced around. Villagers were already beginning to gather, whispering. She felt her heartbeat in her ears. "Why me?" Thabiso's gaze was warm but steady. "Because you're doing something rare. You're not just surviving. You're changing the way people think. People need to see that, to know it's possible." For a moment, Zanele hesitated. Let someone film her? Speak openly on camera? What if they twisted her story? What if it brought more shame? But then she thought of Sifo. His soft smile when she sang to him, the way he now responded to her touch, how he laughed, truly laughed, when she splashed water on his feet during his last bath. He was thriving, and no one outside the circle knew it. She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll tell my story, but only if it's told with truth." Thabiso grinned. "That's all we ever ask." As he set up his camera, villagers began to gather, not to mock this time, but to listen. Zanele's voice was about to travel far beyond Kwathula, and it would carry more than just her pain. It would carry power. The wind was hot and dry the day the documentary aired. Tabiso had told her it would be shown on a popular Facebook Live series and posted on YouTube. Zanele didn't know much about views or algorithms, but she understood one thing. Her face, her voice, and Saifo's name would be seen by more people than she could ever meet. She didn't tell anyone in the village at first. She was still afraid. But Miss Nomley had a laptop and enough data for the live stream. That afternoon, they huddled in her tiny home, screen glowing, heart racing. The video started with soft music and clips of Kwathula's dusty paths. Then her voice. Then her face. And then Sifo, cooing in her arms, eyes wide and curious. The comments began to flood in. "This is powerful. I cried watching this. We need more women like Zanele. I see my mother in her." In just 1 hour, the video had over 5,000 views. By nightfall, it had crossed 20,000, then 50,000. The next morning, 100,000. And that's when the calls started. First from local journalists, then from university students who wanted to interview her for social justice projects. Then came a call from a government office in Durban. Someone in disability affairs wanted to invite her to speak at a regional conference. But not everyone celebrated. That evening, Zanele returned from fetching water to find red paint splashed across her door. In jagged letters, someone had written, "You shame us. You chase cameras like a dog." She stood frozen, Sifo pressed against her back. But instead of shrinking, she reached for water and soap. In front of the neighbors who had gathered to gawk, she scrubbed her door clean. Slowly, with dignity. Then she turned to them and said, "If the truth makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's time you look at yourselves." And just like that, Zanele made it clear. She no longer needed permission to shine. A week after the documentary aired, Zanele stepped into the Kwathula market for the first time in months without feeling invisible or hated. The market, usually a place of whispers and judgment, now buzzed with a strange new energy around her. Some still turned away, but others smiled. A boy offered her a mango, whispering, "I saw you on YouTube." An older man, who had once called Sifo cursed, nodded slowly in passing, not with warmth, but with respect. That was enough. As she walked through the stalls, balancing Sifo on her back and a woven basket on her hip, something unusual happened. People started asking her questions, not about what went wrong, but how she did it. "How do you stretch his legs again?" a woman asked. "My sister's child doesn't walk. Do you think it's the same?" another whispered. "I want to come to your circle," said a shy teenager, avoiding eye contact. Zanele answered each with care, not as a professional, not as someone who had it all figured out, but as a woman who had chosen not to give up. By midday, she had collected more names than she expected, people asking to join the next meeting. She returned home exhausted but full. That evening, Tabiso called. "Zanele," he said, "do you know what's happening? Your video's gone viral. People from Botswana, Lesotho, and even Nigeria are sharing your story. We're planning a follow-up. People are asking, what's next for the mother from Kwathula?" She sat in stunned silence. Then quietly, she said, "What's next is not about me. It's about the children who are still hidden, and the mothers who still believe they are alone." She paused. "And maybe I start a foundation." Tabiso laughed with joy. "Then let's build it." Zanele looked at Sifo, now sound asleep, and whispered, "You were never a burden. You were always the beginning." The following morning, Zanele sat beneath the wild fig tree behind her home, staring at a blank page. She had always been afraid of blank pages, so much like her life used to feel. Uncertain, silent, waiting for someone else to fill in the meaning. But now she was the one holding the pen. A foundation. It sounded so grand, almost too big for a woman who had once been mocked for learning how to pronounce cerebral palsy. And yet, it felt right. She thought of the mothers who had sat quietly in Sifo's circle, tears on their cheeks. She thought of Thando, the teenage girl who had once helped carry her firewood and now volunteered every week. She thought of Sifo, how far he had come, and how far so many like him could go, if only the world would open its arms. But what would she name it? Her eyes drifted to Sifo playing in the dirt nearby, giggling at the way his fingers touched the dry earth. He was laughing. Really laughing. It hit her like a blessing. The Laughing Sun Foundation. It was perfect. That night, with Miss Nomle's help, she sketched out her first plan. It wasn't much, just a rough outline on torn notebook paper, support groups for parents, home visits to children with disabilities, training workshops with health workers, awareness campaigns in rural communities, simple but strong. Within days, Tabiso connected her to 2 nonprofit mentors in Durban, and an intern from a university offered to help her register the foundation officially. Even an old church group from Lusaka reached out, offering to donate wheelchairs. Zanele stood in awe at how a story rooted in shame was becoming a bridge across nations. Later that week, a woman from the next village arrived, holding a baby with a twisted arm. "They said I should come here," she said, her voice cracking. "They said, you help women like me." Zanele rose, took her hand, and smiled. "We help each other now." It was a gray morning when Lutho came back. Zanele was helping Thando prepare the storeroom for the week's circle meeting when a hush fell outside. She stepped out and saw him standing near the fence, older now, with dust on his shoes and shame in his eyes. Her chest tightened. The last time she saw him, he had called Sifo a curse. Now he stood before her like a man searching for a door he once slammed shut. "Zanele," he said softly. She said nothing. "I saw you in that video, the one with the boy. Our son." The words hung between them like wet clothes on a line, dripping with past regrets. "I was wrong," he continued. "I didn't understand. I was afraid. The men in my family, my father, he would have disowned me if I stayed." Zanele crossed her arms, her face unreadable. "So you left before anyone could disown you? You chose shame over your son." Lutho flinched. "I know, but I want to fix things. I want to meet him." She studied him for a long moment. Sifo was napping inside, unaware of the tremble in the air. Part of her wanted to scream, to remind Lutho of the cold nights, the humiliation, the endless hours of carrying a life he had run from. But another part of her, the one who had grown wiser, stronger, understood something deeper. Forgiveness was not about forgetting. It was about power. Her power. "You don't get to walk back in and be Father of the Year," she said calmly. "But you can come on Saturday. Sit in the circle. Listen. Learn. And maybe one day, Sifo will call you father. But that's up to him." Lutho lowered his head, tears rimmed in his eyes. "Thank you." Zanele turned away before he could see her own eyes watering. Strength, she realized, was not in standing alone. It was in knowing when to allow a door to open just enough. Saturday came with unusual quiet. The skies above Kwathula were overcast, and even the goats seemed subdued, as if they too sensed something significant was about to unfold. Zanele arrived early to prepare the circle room as always. She laid out chairs, dusted windows, and placed the day's theme on the chalkboard. Healing is a journey. Sometimes it begins with listening. By 10 a.m., the room was filling. Familiar faces smiled. New ones, nervous and curious, slipped in quietly. Among them was Lutho, dressed in a clean, faded shirt, sitting at the edge of the room like he didn't know whether he belonged or was about to be judged. Zanele said nothing. She let the session begin. That day, the conversation flowed more deeply than usual. One mother spoke of guilt, how she used to hide her daughter when visitors came. Another father, eyes glassy, admitted he had once begged a Sangoma to remove the spirit from his child, only to realize later that the child simply needed therapy. And then, after a long pause, Lutho stood. "I abandoned my son," he said. "And I abandoned the woman who gave him life. I believed what people said about curses and spirits. I was a coward." The room held its breath. But I watched Zanele speak with fire, and I saw my son's face in that video, peaceful, smiling. I don't know how to go back in time, but I want to go forward. I want to help. No one clapped. No one scolded. It was Thando who spoke first. Then show up. Every week, like the rest of us. And so he did. Week after week, Lutho returned. He swept the floor, fetched water, carried chairs, never asking for praise, just present. And Zanele? She watched, quietly, carefully, because some wounds need time, not anger, to heal. A month after Lutho began attending Sifo's circle, life had found a new rhythm. He never asked to hold Sifo. He waited until Zanele offered, and when she did, it was gradual, like passing a sacred object. Sifo didn't cry in his arms. He simply stared at Lutho, curious, calm. That was enough, for now. Then came the letter. It arrived folded and slightly damp, delivered by a taxi driver who'd stopped at Miss Nomley's gate. A thick government envelope with an official seal. Zanele turned it over in her hands several times before opening it. Her breath caught as she read the header. KwaZulu Provincial Office for Social Development. Inside was a typed message, formal, polished, almost too neat for her hands. She read it out loud to Miss Nomley, heart pounding. "Dear Ms. Zanele Mkhize, we are pleased to inform you that you have been nominated to receive the Ubuntu Changemaker Award for your work in disability advocacy and inclusive community development in rural KwaZulu. You are invited to speak at the 6th Annual Ubuntu Conference in Durban, where your story will be featured alongside leaders from across Southern Africa." Zanele blinked, speechless. She had imagined speaking at schools, community halls, maybe a clinic or two, but a conference in Durban? Her name on a panel with doctors and directors? The idea terrified her. But that night she sat with Sifo in her lap, his hand resting over hers, and whispered, "They want to hear from me, Muntanami. That means they want to hear you too." She folded the letter and placed it under her pillow. Outside, the wind carried the smell of distant rain. Not a storm, just change. Something new. Something big. The village had once tried to bury her voice. Now, it was calling her to speak where the world could no longer look away. Zanele had never been to Durban. She had heard about it in songs and gossip. Tall buildings, endless beaches, fast cars, and people who walked with headphones and dreams. But she never imagined she'd be traveling there not as a visitor, but as a speaker. The morning of her journey, half the village came to see her off, not all out of support. Some were just curious to see the girl with the problem child boarding a bus like a minister's wife. Still, many wished her well. Maswide handed her roasted peanuts wrapped in cloth, and Thando tied a fresh scarf around her shoulders. Even Mam Thembi had softened, slipping a quiet blessing into her ear. "Go and make them listen." She wore her best dress, green and yellow with stitched sunbirds, and wrapped Sifo snugly to her back. Lutho offered to carry her small bag. She let him. The bus ride was long, but Zanele stayed awake the whole way, watching the world change outside the window. Fields turned to tar roads, crawls to apartment blocks, goats to traffic lights. It was like stepping into a dream someone else had written, but somehow, she was in the script. When she arrived at the conference venue, her breath caught. Glass doors, marble floors, people in suits. Her knees trembled as she walked in, clutching Sifo. But no one stared. No one scoffed. In fact, people smiled. A young woman guided her to her hotel room. Her own room, with a bed softer than anything she'd ever slept on. Later that evening, she rehearsed her speech in front of the mirror. Her voice cracked, but her eyes stayed strong. "This is for the ones they hide," she practiced. "For the mothers they shame. For the children they silence." Saipho babbled behind her, giggling. Zanele turned and smiled. Tomorrow she would take the stage. And when she did, she would speak not just for herself, but for every voice that was ever told to stay quiet. The lights were warm. Too warm. Zanele stood behind the curtain, clutching the microphone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her stomach twisted as the program director's voice rang through the auditorium. "Next, please welcome a woman who has redefined courage in rural advocacy, Ms. Zanele Mkizi, founder of the Laughing Sun Foundation." Applause. Zanele stepped onto the stage, Saipho resting on her hip, his eyes wide as if sensing the magnitude of the moment. The lights made it hard to see faces, but she could feel them. All those professionals, educators, policymakers, people whose job it was to know. And yet here they were, waiting to hear from her. A woman who once taught herself how to stretch her son's legs using maize meal bags as notebooks. She took a deep breath. "My name is Zanele," she began, voice shaking. "I am not a doctor. I am not a nurse. I am not a teacher. I am a mother." Silence. "But I am also a woman who was told to hide my child. A woman who was called cursed. A woman who was left behind. And now, I am a founder. I am an advocate. And I am here to say, disability is not a death sentence. It is a call to see differently." The crowd leaned in. She shared her story, how she learned, how she fought, how she nearly gave in to silence, and how Saipho's laugh became her compass. She spoke of the circle, of Lutho's return, of the red paint on her door, and the dream of the old woman in the forest. When she finished, there was a pause, a breath. And then, a standing ovation, not polite clapping, real, thunderous, tearful applause. People queued to meet her afterward. Professors, journalists, a woman in a wheelchair who whispered, "You gave me language for my pain." That night, as she lay in the soft hotel bed with Saipho asleep beside her, Zanele stared at the ceiling. She hadn't just told her story. She had sparked a movement. Zanele returned to Kwathula like a storm, but the kind that brings rain, not destruction. The Ubuntu conference video had gone viral across southern Africa. Clips of her speech were circulating on social media. Radio stations quoted her words, and even a morning show in Botswana ran a segment titled, "The Laughing Sun Movement." But Zanele wasn't interested in fame. She returned with a singular focus: scale the foundation. With help from a youth volunteer team from Durban, the Laughing Sun Foundation launched its first mobile program, traveling to nearby villages with basic therapy training, educational workshops, and emotional support groups. They named it Journey Clinics. At first, only a handful attended in each village, but stories traveled faster than wheels. Soon, whole communities began showing up, some with children, some with guilt, some with hope. Zanele trained others to speak, including Thando, who had grown into a fierce and eloquent youth advocate. Even Lutho stepped into a role, coordinating transport, securing spaces, offering his hands in quiet redemption. He never asked to lead, but he showed up every day, and over time, villagers began to look at him differently, not as the man who ran, but as the man who returned. Media crews came and went. NGOs offered grants. Schools asked for talks. Zanele declined some opportunities. "Let us grow our roots before we chase too many skies," she'd say. But something deep had shifted. One day Maswide approached her with mist in her eyes. "We were wrong, child. About you. About your son. You have taught us to see." Zanele didn't need their validation anymore. But hearing it still mattered. That evening she held Saipho, now more vocal, more expressive, responding with laughter to her silly songs, and whispered, "You changed everything, my boy. And it all began because you were born exactly as you are. It was during the last rains of the season that Zanele dreamed again. She hadn't had one of those dreams in a long time, the kind that pulled her into spaces between worlds, where silence spoke louder than words, and symbols felt more real than touch. In the dream, she was walking through the forest once more. But this time, she was not alone. Sifo walked beside her, not limping or struggling, but strong, tall and smiling, with a wisdom far beyond his years. They walked through mist, barefoot, toward the same drums she had heard years before. The same lion stood by the path, but now it bowed to both of them. At the center of the forest clearing stood the old woman again, her face marked with white ash and beads, her voice like wind and thunder. "You have carried him far," she said. "And in doing so, you have carried more than one child. You have lifted generations." Zanele wanted to speak, but her throat held only breath. The woman continued, "But this journey is not only yours now. Others must carry it forward." Then she reached forward and pressed something into Zanele's palm. A seed. When Zanele woke, the early morning sun spilled across her floor. Sifo stirred next to her, murmuring a sound that, if you listened closely, could almost be a word. She opened her hand, half expecting to find the seed still there. There was nothing physical, but she understood the meaning. It was time to build something that would outlive her. That very week, she began drafting the plans for the Laughing Sun Resource Center, a permanent space with therapy rooms, counseling offices, a library of African disability resources, and a garden where mothers could sit in peace. And at the center of that garden, they would plant a tree. From that seed, many roots would grow. 3 years later, Quathula was no longer just a forgotten dot on the map. It had become a symbol, a quiet revolution woven through laughter, tears, and truth. People came from far and wide to visit the Laughing Sun Resource Center, which now stood proudly on land once used as grazing fields. Children who had once been hidden in back rooms now played openly in the sensory garden. Mothers gathered under shade trees to share stories without shame. Local teachers came to learn, not just to teach. The stigma had not disappeared entirely, but it had retreated, replaced by something stronger: understanding. Zanele stood at the gate of the center one late afternoon, watching Sifo, now nearly 7, playing with a group of children. His legs were still stiff and his speech limited, but he moved with confidence, arms wide like wings. He had become more than the face of the foundation. He was its heartbeat. Behind Zanele, a new team was being trained, young women and men from nearby villages who had been inspired by her story. Thando, now in university, returned on weekends to run a youth mentorship program. Lutho, steady and consistent, had become the center's logistics coordinator, and though he and Zanele never resumed a romantic relationship, they had rebuilt something more meaningful: respect. That evening, the center hosted its first regional summit on disability inclusion in rural communities. Zanele opened the event with her signature line: "This began with a boy they told me to hide. A boy who never asked to be anyone's lesson, but became everyone's light." As applause thundered around her, Zanele looked toward the garden where the tree from her dream now grew, tall, strong, and casting a wide shade over mothers and children seated beneath it. She smiled, feeling the warmth of every step, every scar, every storm. Zanele was no longer just a voice in the village. She was a legacy. And Sifo, he was never the burden. He was always the blessing. She smiled, feeling the warmth of every step, every scar, every storm. Zanele was no longer just a voice in the village. She was a legacy. And Sifo, he was never the burden. He was always the blessing.